I'd rather create something that others criticise than create nothing and criticise others.
If you have high quality product behind the bar, it's like a weapon.
It's not about the figures, it's about who those figures are.
The Hospopreneurs Podcast.
I'm going to drink this beer.
Yeah, let's crack them.
With James Henderson.
Hello and welcome to episode 75 of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. Jason Popelier is the CEO of FWO Chartered Accountants and CFO of Tavalon Tea Australia and New Zealand. He holds an MBA from the University of Queensland, my alma mater, and presented a seminar on tea at the world's largest coffee roasters competition and conference, the Golden Bean, in 2018. As a chartered accountant, Jason works across a range of industries with high net worth individuals and consequently wears many hats. Despite this, he's always found time for me and been kind enough to share lessons over our many encounters. Jason is someone I trust the opinion of, and I'm proud to share this conversation of ours. Hello and welcome to the show, Jason.
Thank you, James. Happy to be here.
It's great to have you on, and I'm really looking forward to getting into the show today. As you know, the first question I like to ask you is, what is your crazy hospitality story?
Crazy hospitality story. My crazy hospitality story is a trip overseas to an Asian country, and this was my first particular trip to Vietnam, where I would say, like most Australians, a little bit naive in terms of food and hospitality and just the markets and the sheer amount of different things that you can get. And it's probably not that crazy for a lot of people in hospitality, but for me in particular is when you can buy things just fresh straight off the street, or even bugs and what have you that people catch and roast. And it was a bit of an eye-opener, and it sort of led me into an interest into outside of what I would say the Western society is shaped food. So it sort of opened my world a little bit. So in my eyes, it isn't as crazy, but it was crazy in the fact that it impacted me to open my eyes in terms of what food could be.
Yes. You brought up 2 points there. So firstly, around eating insects and bugs and whatnot. A couple episodes ago, Sky Blackburn was one of our guests, and so she has an insect farm for listeners if you want to go back and get into that one. But you also mentioned there around that it might not be so crazy for someone who's in hospitality. You found yourself to be in hospitality in another way, shape or form, and that's why we're getting into the episode today. You've come from a different world, and it sheds a different lens on the hospitality industry. It's a whole other range of insights that you bring to the hospitality world, and that the hospitality world can then share, and it cycles back around and feeds itself. So I'm excited to hear about your insights through the program today. The next question I like to ask is why you do what you do.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think if anyone has the chance to reflect on themselves, they should really challenge what their drivers are. And I have had the ability to do that, especially in the nature of the work I do. And I found that I like to help people achieve their goals. And as long as I'm doing that, I've got a strong drive to continue to do what I do. And that's led me to a range of different industries, and particularly my main job at a company that I co-own called FWO Chartered Accountants. We're an advisor group, and through my advisor experience had led me to step in and have a stake in food and beverage or the hospitality industry as a wider industry in general. But my insights from what I do from a day-to-day basis, I've got some wins and some losses, but also some fast or agile shifts because of my experience in my day-to-day job.
Absolutely. So tell us a bit more maybe around where things have led you into hospitality.
Yep. So I'm a business and corporate advisor. Originally, I studied accounting and commercial law, became a chartered accountant. Don't hold that against me, or you can if you like. And from there, it gave me an opportunity to get some international experience. It did get a little bit repetitive for me. So then I started moving into a bit more business coaching and succession planning. And from there, I went bigger end of town and went corporate finance, which is mergers, acquisitions, due diligence, financial models. Worked on some pretty exciting projects and gave them some pretty cool code names like Project Lego, Project Mango, all that sort of stuff, depending on what it was and where it was around Australia.
Anyone in that space will understand why they have to have code names as well.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain maybe to people who are more traditionally from hospitality why you do that?
Yep. So obviously if a transaction is occurring or some due diligence is underway, it's very sensitive information and it's not public knowledge, especially the majority of them which are private in nature. Even if they're listed companies, they might do reviews that they don't want the public to know about to make improvements. And so if anyone picks up on the communication, you don't want particular names to be shown or particular entities. So you give it a code name. So everything has a code name, kind of similar to what the military might do or the defense forces. And also it gives us a chance to give a bit of creativity to the job as well.
Yeah, a bit of fun.
A bit of fun, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly, yeah.
But without digressing, I'd like to bring you back to your story there as well.
Yeah, I've got clients who trust me as a key advisor on a range of different areas around finance, around general business, around coaching and succession, around cash flow improvements, and also my insights from different segments in the community for all my range of different clients. So I had someone that approached me to help them with a particular venture that they were getting into. And from there, it happened to be a company called Tavalon, which is a luxury tea company, and it has other products associated to it as well, but it's a tea theme. And I looked at the product, gave my advice, and got along reasonably well with the owners, and they gave me an opportunity or position to me if I wanted to buy in a small stake of the company and help them eventuate their goals. There was a little bit that they wanted some free advice, but then it also created an opportunity for me, so it was a bit of win for both sides.
And something to open up, just to touch on quickly there, is what does that sort of process look like for those who aren't as experienced in purchasing a company or receiving equity for their consulting work and whatnot? What does that sort of look like for someone who isn't as experienced?
Yeah, okay. I'll split it down to what types of capital there are. So an ownership is referred to as capital. You can have sweat equity or sweat capital, which is essentially you work in the business and you get rewarded for KPIs. The other side is when you put physical capital into it, and that might be via assets, it might be via cash injection, and the majority out there would actually be just the physical injection of cash, and majority of people would actually be a silent investor. For me, it was a bit of, I am part silent, but I am strategic, so I get involved a fair bit on the board level and some key events and decision making. So that's where my expertise is, so that's why they want to bring me into those certain positions. But I also have my other businesses and entities to run as well, but it enables me to do both, so I can focus my day-to-day mostly on a few things that I like doing and my drivers on helping multiple people achieve their goals and aspirations through my advice or guide them to achieve. And it also enables me to get a real benefit for some of the decisions and input I have. So generally, unless it's my own set of entities, any advice I would get enjoyment out of seeing clients achieve their goals. But this one, I kind of am the client at the same time. So as we succeed, it's a bit more of an extra win for being part of it. So yeah, it's exciting.
Obviously, you're having a background in corporate finance has provided you with all sorts of other insights into the finance world that you're in too. So what are some other ways that businesses can fund themselves?
I like to call it the triple effect for any business. There's a range of public. So the government can fund certain things and through grant applications, and they give certain funding for Ignite programs or whatever it might be. You also can get donations to see, or angel investment to see things off, where people would give small amounts just to give it a bit of a leg up. But where most of them come in is a combination of a founder or a couple of finders injecting some capital and also essentially their own sweat capital to try and get a proof of concept up to a point of raise. So where a lot of businesses actually leverage is when they get to that point where they've got a proof of concept, they can prove that they've got a track record of generating some revenue. It doesn't have to be a hell of a lot, but prove the case that, you know, whatever product you have or service you have, that there's a need for it. You're just lacking some skill sets or some technical knowledge or something. It might be just that you're lacking an injection of capital, but generally with smaller businesses, it's a combination of both. And what a lot of investors look to do, or a lot of initial founders of startup companies like to do, is find what we call smart money. And smart money is an injection of capital, but it comes with someone that actually has experience in the industry, which was similar to my case. Even though I didn't have a broad knowledge of the industry, I had other technical attributes that I could bring to the business around finance, around accounting systems, best practice, cash flow improvement, even from a corporate point of view around governance and even the board direction, because that's essentially what I do for a day-to-day. So I can inject my knowledge in there. So instead of them going out to the market and saying, this is what we're trying to do and this is how much money we need, they're more likely to come to me because I can offer more than just money. Because at the end of the day, money could be dead money and it's good, but you don't want to take on and give up too much capital at an early stage if you don't have to.
Absolutely. You do a lot of different things, right? And that, to a lot of people, it might confuse them.
Yeah.
So how do you go about clarifying to people that you might work with about the things that you do?
You have to be open and honest and try to give them clarity about what you do, which is obviously a hard thing. That's why I'm getting asked the question. I'm upfront about what my day job is. So I tell people that I'm a business and corporate advisor, and that's my day job. And I invest on the side. And some of my investments I'm a little bit more involved with. And that's where I lead in with the likes of Tavalon. And I do have appropriate titles. So with Tavalon, I have a CFO role for Australia and New Zealand. From a global perspective, I don't have a title, but we do have partner meetings. And when John Paul Lee, for anyone that wants to look up Tavalon, he's the original founder or one of the co-founders. He's the sole founder that's still around. He bought out one of his partners early on in the piece because they were pivoting in different directions. He would come out, or we'd get on a Skype call or a WhatsApp call and have meetings about challenging decisions. And I would have some input there if it affects obviously myself or my interest, but also if I have some value to put in there. So I have a lot more impact on the Australia, New Zealand market, less so on international, but I do have a say.
Tell us a bit more about Tavalon, maybe about the history of the brand and a bit more about what your involvement is moving forward.
Yeah, okay. So Tavalon itself, I like the brand. I like the quality. I think I was more attracted to the quality of the produce. So with Tavalon, its name comes from tea plus Avalon. So King Arthur, the pursuit of paradise, Avalon. So tea paradise is how Tavalon was created. And it was more to bring back quality to the tea industry. John Paul Lee, he's actually a coffee drinker, like myself. I also drink tea though. And he was sitting around, and his family have a big passion for tea. And he was working in England at the time, but he was from New York. And the quality of the hospitality produce over there has a wide range, and most of it is of a lesser quality, unless you're willing to pay a significant amount of money for that. So he wanted to essentially disrupt the market and bring back quality of tea. With a bit of history, tea used to be a lot more consumed in the Western society until I'll blame the tea bag. When the tea bag came into effect, it actually lowered the quality of tea significantly, mostly because in a mass-produced tea bag, which you'll see from the usual likes of Dilmah, Lipton, Tetley's, or Bushels in Australia, all that sort of stuff, you're probably looking at about 70% of the bag is actually dirt, dust and twigs. So whenever you pull the tea bag and you get that bitterness taste, that's actually the crap that's not supposed to be in there that comes out of the tea bag. And high quality tea, as a lot of the Asian communities know it, it's still very well-established industry in those particular areas, which makes sense to a lot of people. Tea was initially founded in China, and it wasn't until the British influence stole tea and took it to India that it actually came out to India and Sri Lanka. So they actually stole the tea leaf. And it's had its various forms from there. Yeah, so going back to Tavalon was founded in New York probably about 15, 16 years ago, mostly wholesale, so direct to 5-6-star hotels and fine dining. We built up, my partners at the time built up an association with a lot of Michelin star chefs, started working with them, collaborating around what they want and what they could use it for. So we did a lot of mixes with certain foods and baking, as well as cocktail mixes with the teas as well, and associated with particular restaurants.
And when was this? What sort of time frame was this?
This would have been a solid probably 13, 14 years ago, but the concept still applies to now. You got to build a brand, and you got to build an awareness around the brand. Anyone that's starting out in business, if you can collaborate with someone else and leverage off each other's brand, you're more likely to succeed. So if I just take a side note and say to any entrepreneur out there or any aspiring business owner, don't try and do everything yourself. You don't know everything, and if you think you do, you're more likely going to fail. If you can find people with common interests that you can leverage off and they're positive for your profile or for your business, and you can collaborate, do it. You never know what's going to come of it. If you have a failed product, it doesn't mean the next one's going to be failed. If you look at a lot of entrepreneurs, you hear about all their successes, but you don't hear about all their failures, and they do have a lot of failures to their resumes. So through collaboration, and it is a feeling thing, you will learn who you can collaborate with, who you can't. And then we found some good people to collaborate with, and still are. So there's still a lot of collaboration, which I'll get to a little bit later on, with what we're trying to do with the tea industry, and we're trying to evolve it and change people's perspectives on tea. Yeah, but going back to how it was founded, it was mostly a wholesale direct to those customers, high volume, lower margin, but high quality. And we started to build from there. That gave us a bit of size, scalability to then implement what I would say would be our main point of difference, which is the quality factor. And And what we actually do is we source from boutique farms from around the world, depending on where that produce is better known or grown. So for instance, our chamomile comes from Egypt, our rooibos comes from South Africa, our lemongrass comes from Thailand, our cool mint comes from Germany. So depending on where the climate is better known, we source from those locations and we find farms that fit our philosophy, and we lock down exclusive rights to those farms by guaranteeing a revenue stream. So regardless of whether they've got wastage stock or produce, we still pay them the amount, but within that amount that we pay them, they have to maintain their maintenance on the farms. They actually can schedule their farms, and that was one of the concepts that really tied me in, because with what I do, if you get predictability around your cash flow, then you can plan and you can put maintenance programs or even training programs for your staff, and it's predictable or somewhat predictable. Not everything can be 100% predictable, but if you know that you can build and constantly build, then you can plan better. And if you can plan better, then you're more likely to hit your strategic goals. So the fact that they've actually thought about that and started implementing that to really protect what the brand was one of the enticing factors for me to get involved. So now, as we keep getting bigger, we just keep adding more and more boutique farms. And if for whatever reason conditions aren't good in a particular area, that just limits the stock. But it limits the stock for everyone in the tea industry. The difference is our tea is maintained at a higher quality. It's a limited supply, and depending on how much demand there is for that particular tea, we can essentially control that price to the market.
How do you go about scheduling the farm? What's the sort of process involved for agriculture to providing that predictability in agriculture? How does that actually work?
Yeah, good question. I don't personally do it, but I know the process, so I'll talk to the process. So people come to us now in terms of they've got an ingredient. Sometimes we'll source ingredients. So for instance, we want to do some more with Australian produce around its natural leaves and maybe eucalyptus or something like that, and natural herbs. We kind of have to put an expression of interest out and test some samples. But in the wider community, in areas that we're already pretty dominant, we get given samples or people approach us. We test the samples, and then it's a bit of a lengthy process because we have to go out, physically test the sites, speak to the owners. It doesn't matter if the site is up to standard. If the owners have a different philosophy, then it won't have longevity. So there's no point of us investing our time in that. It has to align in terms of, if we guarantee someone's revenue stream, they might just go, well, let's lock that in. So there's scheduled audits around the predictability with the farmer, with their cash flow. We'll sit down with the farm owners and see what they're currently paying. It's a bit of an open and trust relationship. There has to be enough revenue for them to, first of all, lock down exclusive rights to the produce, but then there also has to be enough revenue in there for them to implement positive change onto their farm and to their community. And in a lot of countries around the world, less so in Australia, a lot of the margin actually goes to the brokers. So as soon as you break that gap, there's a lot more revenue that you can pass directly on to the farms, and it's still very competitive to what you're actually purchasing for it anyway. We do have a couple of reserves, and by reserves I mean exclusive purchases of stock. So for instance, our Earl Grey, we usually bring out a reserve, and what we do is we don't have a particular farm that we source our Earl Grey from. We go and test the particular year's batch of Earl Grey, and we 100% buy all the best quality. So if there's a particular reserve from a farm, we'll buy it. We'll overpay for it to keep that prestige. So we'll just go to them and say, we'll buy everything and you're only going to source to us. But if they can't produce that next year, we'll go and source it from someone else. So that's also a way that we can engage with farms and open up our market outside of what we might think when we actually source reserves and bring out a reserve, which will just brand a reserve for the particular point in time. And once that reserve runs out, then we'll have to source another reserve.
Yes. So for the listeners who aren't from tea, how do you grade tea?
So with a lot of different foods in gourmet is in terms of the size, the colorings on the tea as well. What you'll get with a lot of oolong teas, you might get a longer in general, so it won't be cut up. So the longer the tea leaf generally means that it has less damage through a machine. So with us, we hand pick, hand blend, hand pack our produce, especially our loose leaf. We've got different ranges with the tea bag, but our premium tea bag is actually hand sewn with a silk bag for our fine dining restaurants for speed issues. It's a lot easier to use a tea bag, but we've got a tea bag that's probably probably 3 or 4 times the size of a normal tea bag for that air rate in terms of steeping the tea. But what you'll find is bigger, the tea leaves are bigger, there's a lot more smell to tea when it's of a higher quality. We don't use any artificial flavours or colourings. If we do have any additional flavour that gets put in, we use essential oils and we hand blend that into the batch, or the sommeliers do anyway. They test the produce and hand blend our mixes. But yeah, it comes down to the size of the tea leaf and also the smell of the tea leaf and the colouring depending on the type of tea. Some tea leaves don't really change in colour. So for instance, rooibos will have that rich sort of red bush look, whereas chamomile will have obviously...
Which means red bush, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, rooibos means red bush, but it does really look like a red bush when you see it. And anyone from South Africa will be ingrained with rooibos. But yeah, going back to chamomile, the chamomile buds themselves will be larger in quantity. They'll be less damaged. They won't be pulled apart. When you steep it, a lot of almost like the pollen won't come in, just the little flakes of chamomile will come in, and you'll have a stronger, more richer flavour when you drink it. And you'll also get a strong smell when you smell the tea before you drink it as well. So there's a few things, but if you're just looking at it from an aesthetic point of view, it'll be a larger leaf, it'll have a particular colouring, and you can smell as soon as you open the concealed container.
Fantastic. Before I move on to another question, I've got a little one that came up as part of your answer there.
Yep.
Being a coffee drinker, this is about coffee, so I'm sort of pivoting to coffee a little bit
That's
for just a
fine.
moment.
Yep.
You mentioned there around obviously tea bags being not the best way to consume tea.
Yeah.
I've noticed there's some innovation happening in coffee that's doing the same sort of thing with coffee. It's like a coffee bag. What's your position on something like that? Do you feel like coffee is going to be impacted negatively, or maybe it is a better way to drink coffee?
No.
I'm going to not say anything.
No, that's fine. I do have a bit of an interest in coffee, which I said at the start of the podcast. My take is that the coffee industry, especially in Australia, has pivoted in multiple directions. It's already gone through the mass market ground, Nescafe blends, whereas tea was already loose leaf and then went to mass produced, which was the tea bag, whereas coffee started from there, in particular in the Western society. So it's had time to evolve in various different markets. And I think and this is my personal opinion, with the bag type scenario, I think it's just an evolution of a middle range. With coffee, it's always better fresh, so freshly ground. Depends on what particular beans you use, how you roast, and whether you over roast it or not. And I'm gonna pick on a couple here, but the fast food sort of or takeaway places like up in Queensland, like Zarafas, or worldwide, you've got Starbucks. They over roast their coffee bean, which means the caffeine content is actually damaged or gets reduced, and they mix it in with a bunch of syrups to essentially give you your kick. So with the coffee itself, you're not actually getting the kick from the coffee bean, and you're getting your kick from the syrup. So you come back because of the syrup taste and the smell, and you get addicted to that versus a good coffee. So in my opinion, there's a whole range of different categories in coffee now, and it's actually expanded where people are actually sampling a little bit more in funkies, which are blends of jams and honeys and cinnamon and a bunch of other things that they're trying different tastes of different types of roasting, where if you put it with a milk and have a milk coffee, it'll bring out a different taste versus an espresso, which might have, your acidic levels a little bit higher or whatever it might be. So we're seeing particular blends done for espressos versus a milk drink, and even particular markets. And through that, you obviously get very mixed ranges. But I'm finding that the coffee industry, in particular in Australia, has come from a Nescafe at home, what I would say is shoveling in garbage, to it's okay to have a coffee out at a cafe in a restaurant. And now it's more commonly known. Less people are having a coffee at home, and then they went and had coffee out. And then it went back and had a combination with the Nespresso pods, where it was funky and trendy to have coffee back at home. But people who were doing that were also going out and having coffee at restaurants. So they were having a bit of both, because the quality of the pods, even if they weren't as good as a cafe or a restaurant, they were still better than a ground bean at home out of a tin. But you're never going to be able to beat the coffee quality from a freshly ground coffee bean at a restaurant or even at home. Where you might, and this is where it comes similar to tea, is it's all about the cleanliness. If your machine is clean, if the grind is fresh, so you've cleaned it away and there's no excess grind, it's all a fresh grind, the quality is always going to be higher quality as well as a consistent quality. So what I'm finding now with the coffee industry is there's a lot of technology going into around machines and maintaining consistency, because us as humans grade consistency, whether you believe it or not. Maybe reflect on this: quality through consistency. So if we get something and it tastes amazing and we get it a second time and it tastes pretty similar, it doesn't have to taste exactly the same, we automatically go, that's great. But if we get something and it's good and then all of a sudden it doesn't taste the same, then we go, oh, there's a bit of hit and miss. And we'll know in our nature when something's different to what we're normally used to. We'll know if they changed the beans from your regular cafe blend when you go to your hotspot. It does taste differently. We'll know when they've changed a barista in particular, because the cleanliness of a particular barista would change. And if they're a bit rushed and they don't dedicate their art to what they're doing, it tastes through the coffee.
100%. I'm really glad you were passionate about coffee.
Yeah,
We went on in another direction than I was even expecting. But I would like to bring it back to a discussion around tea again.
Yes, yeah.
Coming with a business mind into tea, what are some key drivers you found in the tea business?
For us, we already had a superior product, and that actually gave us some big challenges in the Australian market, in particular because we were, and I don't mean to sound cocky, but we were actually too good for the market, and we got a bit of a surprise back, even for some of our 5-6 hotels that we now serve to. Initially, they didn't need to provide a better quality tea to their customers because their customers were associated to a very poor quality. So it was through education and educating the market on the benefits of tea, the health benefits, and also just a healthier alternative to a whole range of other beverages, especially through our iced teas. So our iced tea range is a healthier alternative for a lot of buffets. So for instance, if I had to name drop one of our hotels, the Sheraton, put a couple of our iced teas out as an alternative to Coca-Cola or an apple juice or an orange juice that had a lot of sugar added to the natural sugar that's already in there, whereas ours had a strong taste and a natural taste because they steeped it overnight for about 12-14 hours, and it brought out the natural flavours of the tea, and that was a healthier option. We kind of leveraged into the Australian market a little bit on the health benefits, because the health benefits are more known in Australia than quality. So we used a combination of quality as well as health benefits and what it can do to have an alternative option. What we also found was you can't have a one entry point into the market. You've got to test and try. And if you've only got a one product and a one scenario, it's not going to work. With food and beverage, for anyone that's interested in working in this industry, what you'll find is there's a lot of long-term contracts and you've got to wait for those contracts to end. And that was the case with us, that people were saying, yes, we love it, or we want to come on board, but we've got another 6 months, we've got another 5 months, we've got another 2 years, whatever it might be. And then they're still hesitant. They're hesitant because they want brand awareness, but they also want the market to take it up and embrace it too. And us, in particular Australians, are resistance to change, and that comes through education, but it's also our nature as well compared to a lot of other countries. So if you look at America, for instance, which is still a westernized culture, they're a lot faster at making decisions. They're not as brand loyal, whereas we are, and it might come back from our comrade sort of mentality back in the day where we band together and embrace, but it's been slowly broken apart as we've sold off just about every Australian-owned major corporation that we did have. But yeah, we found multiple challenges, if I'm speaking honestly, but through collective openness with my business partners and valid input, even if it wasn't, we still honoured it and created discussions and created conflict in a good way. Conflict is in, we didn't agree with each other, so we challenged the concepts to come up with a better alternative or another alternative, so we at least could try. And I would recommend anyone to use fast learnings and be a little bit more agile, especially within new markets, and don't just overinvest and hoping that it's going to succeed. Test it, trial it, give some samples out, have them use it. What we started doing with a lot of our hotels was they had contracts in place, even if it was their own internal contracts, which I'll come to an example in a minute. But a lot of tea companies didn't have bulk sachets that made 4 litres per bag. So if you wanted to make 8 litres of iced tea, you just throw 2 bags in, and the quality was maintained all the way through. So there was less loose leaf because the loose leaf was actually in our big silk bags, and it was cost effective. It ended up being significant significantly cheaper than the soft drinks or the juices. Significantly, we're talking 20 times cheaper by the bulk, because they are quite expensive, because they're using brand names and there's a lot of sugars and other products inside versus tea, which is just a natural product. So we used other alternatives, the likes of one of the more well-known hotels in Sydney called the Shangri-La. They actually own their own tea company in the group, in the Shangri-La group. We positioned with them that what were their diamond members getting versus their other rooms? What was their point of difference for those rooms? And we used value proposition, because we market ourselves and we had a better produce than our competitors, that yes, you've got your own product and continue to use it, but what's the benefit of paying more for a room for a night? Yeah, you get slightly better room, you get slightly better service, but what about the beverages? What about the food? Is it still mediocre? We positioned to go into their diamond lounge, and then every room on the diamond status now serves Tavalon versus their own company blend, which is on every other room. We ended up, through conversations, negotiations, working with them over time, challenging their own concepts to say, look, we're not trying to take, one of your subsidiaries on. We're just trying to elevate you guys by elevating ourselves as well. We're collectively bringing a better product to the market.
Which is a very difficult thing to negotiate there, because obviously if that's a business they're in, that was managed very well to facilitate that.
Yeah.
So well done for getting that then. I don't know if that was you or someone else.
It was a collective approach, and it has to be. So I was there for some of the conversations, but I wasn't there for all of them or the majority, but it was a slow game, and that particular contract took about 9 months.
So on that, does that mean because you mentioned that these contracts are very long, did you start that negotiation 9 months before the contract ended?
In this particular one, their contract is still going. So they haven't stopped serving their own tea. All they've done is chosen another alternative for their premium offering as well as their day spas. So they continued on with their own ones. They just started sourcing from us as well. But that was a 9-month process. Bringing our tea for them all to sample, sending them overseas to particular decision makers, making sure that we're staying at the hotel when particular people are there as well. We came in as a collaborative approach, and we said, we're supporting you by staying at your hotel, so why won't you just give us a chance? And worst case, you just say no. And luckily enough, our loose leaf is very competitive for the price, but the quality far exceeds. And our ice tea in our bulk bags wasn't really done by anyone in particular in Australia. And even still, a lot of people are using loose leaf, or they're using a lot smaller bags that's more domestic versus a wholesale approach. In terms of the market with Australia, it's very different. It's very hard to get traction on a wholesale account. It's very slow, but as you built up a wholesale list, you just make sure that you nurture those clients, and then you just keep compounding. So you aim for smaller targets and convert them, and then just compound the recurring revenue. Make it easier for them to reorder. So talk to your customers around what's the most difficult things about dealing with us, and then try and improve them. If you can make their life easier, it's going to be better. So we ended up hiring some sales support staff who would check in on a monthly basis and suggesting to some of our loyal customers, although we were giving bigger discounts for higher orders, because they were continuing to order, if they committed the same amount that they were ordering anyway in a 3-month period, we won't charge them any more if we just send it out on a monthly basis, because it made it easier for them, so they didn't have to worry about storage, and we would store it for them. But we knew that we had a committed cash flow for 3-month stints. It's a little bit harder with some of the larger accounts. Stock control is a very big issue with a lot of import-export businesses, as well as just inventory businesses in general. So having predictability in your stock control or your inventory levels is a significant advantage over your cash flow. The more that you know and the more that you can control, or more that you can predict, the easier it is to do business and the easier it is to make decisions. So we started working with clients around how it would benefit them, but it also benefits us, because we've got predictability around reordering levels. We know that if we order a particular way, or from a particular country, from a particular type of tea, and source it, that we've got X amount of days in terms of shipping or air freight, and then we've also got X amount of days in customs, and then we've also got X amount of days in quality assurance in terms of the warehouse and blending, and then also packaging. So as soon as you understand the logistics around your business and its detail, then you can have more predictability if you implement the right systems and the right processes, that you can essentially, through technology these days, you can essentially predict when you might reorder. And then what you do is you implement a buffer just in case. What is your buffer? And your buffer might be an extra month's worth of stock. You don't need it, but how would it impact your business if you couldn't order for a month? Would you lose accounts? Would your business still exist? Do you have loyal customers who would stick around? And the bigger you are with smaller customers, yeah, you probably have a bit more power versus your customers. So you're the supplier has the power. But if your customers are bigger, they're a collective and they order large quantities, they might have the power and they might go, you know what, we just want predictability because it's easier. It's easier for them just to go, I want this, and it turns up. If someone's willing to hold stock for them for 6 months worth at their facility at their own cost, that's easier for the customer. So it's a fine line that you've got to work with, and the more that you can predict around it, the easier it is from a cash flow point of view.
So obviously to provide more predictability, are there businesses that get involved in the tea futures market? Is that a thing, or is that more over-the-counter stuff?
They might, especially like a Unilever or something like that, which, Unilever, Lipton, they also own T2, bought T2 quite a few years ago. They might have a bit more interest and stake in that. My background in terms of financial modelling and technology meant that I was a little bit more hands-on in that sense. We had open conversations with our supply network constantly. And the beauty of our business now, because of the sheer size we are, we've got some major warehouses in a couple of locations in the world. Our biggest one was in New York, but they've just opened a bigger one in New Jersey. We've also got another one in South Korea. We're working on one here and expanding here as well. But we have locations or head offices around some strategic locations around the world. So if something happens with the supply chain, we can, at an extra cost to us, we can get it freighted from one of those locations and still maintain our supply chain, which a lot of other businesses can't do, but we can do that because we've got an open partnership arrangement.
How can a business, say, for example, that's more service oriented, they don't have stock that they can hold, they can't bank up in a warehouse all this product, how can they go about accounting for these sorts of difficulties that can come about that could possibly lose them clients or whatnot, these unpredictable forces of nature that then mean that you have sick staff members or maternity leave or paternity leave or whatever, yep. So people are out. How can you go about accounting for the workflow?
Yeah, good questions. I would take probably a step back and say you need to understand the business that you're in and what your key risks are. And if you're in a professional services or a services type business, your key risk, a fair bit of that is actually in the key persons. So if a particular staff member is away who has all the knowledge and there's no cross sharing of roles, does the business cease for a day or two? Does it stand still? Does it create a bottleneck? If it does, you really need to invest time and resources to cross training your staff members so that there is someone that can pick up the slack or reduce the risk. So a lot of if I take a step over to when I was in corporate finance, a lot of some of the due diligence was around identifying the risks of the industry, and regardless of what industry it was, key person risk was a major factor. It's a major factor for who controls the relationships. If I'm going back to Tavalon with our supply network, if we've got a key person who interacts with all our suppliers or key people and something happens to them, that would impact because we have to build that relationship back up to some degree. But if it was a shared role, then they would know that there's systems in place and they'll know the procedures if something happened. So taking a step back and using myself, for instance, with the bank, if my business banker for my portfolio of loans is away sick or on holidays or whatever it might be, I've actually got a direct email line, which is a pool of resources that give you priority. So if I need something done within a day or half a day, I can go straight to that email. And because I've got my registered accounts, there's only some of my accounts that are registered through that line. You have to be within a certain metric of business banking. I can get it serviced, even if my key account manager is away. It doesn't have to wait. It doesn't have to go through a channel. They can just directly speak to me because it's on a particular list. So it's identifying what those risk factors are. With my day job at FWO, my staff members are predominantly female. Not that that's a bad thing. It's the nature of the business. And part of the reason I do have a lot of females is because they're better workers than the majority of males. But there has, like you said before about maternity leave and what have you, as long as you're aware of it, you can plan around it. So I've got 4 of my female staff members who work part-time around their kids or around their lifestyle. And it's the nature of the business. So I've got some roles where I don't like to cross-share jobs, but what I like to do is have a pool of resources that you can allocate tasks to, and they're responsible for the tasks that they've been delegated. And you delegate to particular people for those tasks. And I know that I've got predictability around their hours. If they need to change those hours, they communicate. So it's about openness. openness, it's about understanding. Because I'm understanding and open around flexibility, they know that they can come to me and they don't have to shy around it. And if I know that there's an issue, I can deal with it. If I don't know, that's the hardest thing in business.
Yes, thank you very much. Jason, the next question I have for you is, what's your biggest challenge right now?
Biggest challenge right now in terms of Tavalon?
Let's go with Tavalon. Yes,
Okay.
please.
So our biggest challenge right now is we're in a period where we're pivoting to what people might say is a J curve. It's predicting when that's going to occur and trying to put systems and processes in place, as well as make sure that the supply chain can handle it. And it's very challenging in itself because we need to make sure we have enough capital aside to purchase the inventory, to expand our infrastructure in terms of our packaging, our bagging, our blending, all that sort of stuff, our warehousing facilities, making sure that we can gradually grow without overcommitting capital. Because the last thing we want to do is to not take advantage of an opportunity and leverage. And on the flip side, we don't want to overcapitalize ourselves and cut ourselves out of a lot of opportunities because we've got huge debts. I'm not saying that we do have, but just saying that we don't want to overspend our capital when we can inject them in a particular area. So our biggest challenge at the moment is around, we've proven to a lot of customers that our product is better, growing there. We're expanding gradually from Queensland down, and we're getting more and more traction. We know that it's going to occur, we just don't know when. And the reason why we know it's going to occur is because we're seeing the momentum and we're seeing that people are more interested in us. A lot more people contact us. We're having distributors contact us all the time.
Is that how you measure that?
Well, there's a range of measurements. So it's around acquisition of customers, both from a wholesale point of view as well as a consumer point of view. Because we do have an online presence, we are getting some more impact around that. So people might try our tea at a particular restaurant and then they'll go online and buy. So we're seeing gradually our social media purchases increase as well as our wholesale accounts increase. We'll have a fluctuation in terms of inventory management, in terms of the ordering, but on average it is growing quarter by quarter and it is building to a momentum. But separate to that, we've actually been speaking to some large accounts that have reasonable restaurants up to fine dining restaurants in the nature of 100 locations. We've been speaking to the likes of Emirates in terms of business and first class flights. Been speaking to Qantas in terms of business and first class flights. We don't want to be in the generic because that's not where our brand is. It's about positioning that. We've also been trying to leverage our facilities and have other brands for the other market that make it a bit easier. So the likes of a second, third, fourth label or different companies that can supplement, but we can still cross-share the facilities in terms of that market. So there's a number of factors, but they're all trending in a positive way, which is a good thing for us. In any business, if you continue to focus on what you do and you do it reasonably well, at a particular point, you'll build more momentum. So if I refer to a book that I used to read called Good to Great from Jim Collins, and he refers to the flywheel approach, how you build slow momentum and it slowly builds. And then as you keep adding to the momentum, it slowly gets faster, and then all of a sudden the momentum just kicks in and it won't stop because the momentum core focus is continuing in a particular area. We're at the point where the flywheel is starting to turn faster. It hasn't accelerated. We're getting close to a pivot point where the market opens up, where our consumers are starting to go, we prefer your product and we're never going back. So we're getting feedback that once people have tried it, they don't really want to purchase other tea, which is a positive thing for us. We've also got some negative feedback initially, around the pricing and everything else, but then we're able to shut those down because we go, well, if you look at our competitors on a retail basis, they're about the same price, but the quality's not there. So if I'm using the probably more known one in the market, which would be T2, which is owned by Unilever, they're of a very poor quality tea. It's declining too because they're solely focusing on supermarkets now. So ever since Unilever purchased them, the whole focus was on cheaper, faster, straight to the retailer in the fastest way possible, which is supermarkets. So they've been appearing more and more in supermarkets. So there'll be less at retail. But one of the advantages of those guys were that it was trendy, it was colourful, it's cool.
Marketed very well.
It's marketed very, very well. But when you start to cannibalize your own market in terms of going direct to the supermarkets versus not, that it starts to attack that own market, which enables us to come in to that market if we want to. And their qualities are significantly different, and we're not the only ones that are coming to the more premium market. There's quite a few others, which is part of the reason why Unilever have decided not to compete, because they can't compete in terms of quality in that area. But they have a lot of artificial flavors and smells. So if you look at their tea, the smell actually disappears after a few days versus ours, which stays, provided it's just got a sealed container. So we're starting to get positive feedback, and more so as we invest a lot more in brand awareness from particular shows. So we're talking about trade shows, and although they're a significant spend, some of them are $30,000. 35, 40. I think the lowest one we did was about 15. Significant spend for a relatively small operation, Australian-owned entity sort of stuff. The more that you do, the more they add up, and you don't get the value straight away. But what you do is you build awareness and brand. And what we're finding is a lot more people are taking notice. And because we try to be genuine people, a lot more people are willing to introduce doors and open up pathways for us. So we're starting to see that a lot more. There's a guy by the name of Nick who owns San Remo Australia, so the coffee machines. He's a great advocate for us. He believes in the brand and in the quality, and they're about quality with their machines. So although it's coffee versus tea, because they focus on quality, he sees where we're heading, and he's a nice enough guy to give us some knowledge, and vice versa. He also comes to us for particular things as well, because I have a particular skill set, as well as some of my business partners have different skill sets as well.
Totally. And that's something that listeners are familiar with, the idea that through this program, it's cross-pollinating ideas across all of the hospitality industry, all along the supply chain. So that's definitely something that we're familiar with, that concept.
Yeah.
It's obviously a very exciting time for you, for Tavalon, but I have one more question for you. It's a much easier one than anything to do with the others. I'd just like to know who you'd like to hear on the show next.
Ooh, who I'd like to hear on the show next? Good question. I'd like to hear someone more in publications around where the hospitality industry is heading. So this might be a bit hard to find, but someone that has a cross between economics principles and publications, because they can apply it to real life, would be a good interest for me personally.
Yep. Someone like me.
Someone like yourself, hence why I like talking with you. But if I'm speaking honestly, someone that has practical experience that can apply it in a new way. And so the reason I said publications is because they've got a particular way that they can articulate where the hospitality industry is heading. And I think for the majority of people, they're able to expand to the audience in a more powerful, meaningful way. And if you pick a particular publicist in an area that you haven't necessarily focused on, or an area that's sort of starting to trend a little bit more, or even an area that's probably had a bit more disruption or so. With disruption, I would say around health being a massive disruptor for Australia for a number of years. So because of that, there's a lot of people that have been able to learn what impact positive and quality food or the health benefits in particular beverages or food has evolved the market, and having those insights and how to brand that together, I think would be very powerful.
Beautiful. Well, thank you very much for being on the show today, Jason. It's been amazing having you on.
Thank you, James.
The show today was produced by the in-house audio team at Hospopreneurs, led by Jake Olver. Voiceovers were by Angus Brennan. To learn more, head to hospopreneurs.com.